The trail stretched before us like a promise, winding through the jagged peaks of Colorado's Front Range. But it was his shadow beside mine that held my heart hostage. I'd known Ethan for years, his easy grin, his reckless charm, the way his voice carried over a campfire, but nothing prepared me for the way he looked at me that day, under the endless sky, when the world felt like it belonged to just us. By the time we descended, I was no longer the same man who'd started the climb, and the memory of what happened still burns, a wound I can't stop touching. My name is Caleb, and I'm 27, a graphic designer with a quiet life in Denver. Ethan, my best friend since college, was the opposite, a carpenter with calloused hands and a laugh that could pull anyone into his orbit. We were inseparable back then, sharing late-night talks in dorm rooms, debating life, love, and everything in between. I came out to him sophomore year, my voice shaking as I admitted I was gay. He didn't flinch, just hugged me and said, "You're still you, man. Nothing changes." But everything changed for me. I'd loved him quietly, hopelessly, for years, burying it under jokes and shared beers, knowing he was straight, knowing he'd never see me the way I saw him. That summer, Ethan suggested we hike Mount Bierstadt, a grueling 14-mile trek. "It'll be epic," he said, his blue eyes glinting with that familiar mischief. I agreed, though I wasn't much for heights. The idea of being alone with him in the wild, away from the noise of our lives, felt like a chance to breathe or maybe to suffocate. We packed light, water, granola bars, a first aid kit, and my unspoken longing. The morning we set out, the air was crisp, the sky a piercing blue. Ethan drove, singing off-key to some country song, while I stole glances at him, memorizing the way his blonde hair curled at the nape of his neck. The trail started easy, a gentle slope through alpine meadows dotted with wildflowers. Ethan led the way, his strides confident, his backpack bouncing slightly. "You keeping up, city boy?" he teased, tossing a grin over his shoulder. I laughed, but my chest tightened. Every step felt like a countdown to something I couldn't name. We talked about nothing and everything: work, his ex-girlfriend who'd left him last year, my failed dates. "You'll find someone," he said, his tone softer than usual. "Someone who gets you." I nodded, unable to meet his eyes, afraid he'd see the truth written in mine. By noon, we'd reached the steeper section, where the trail turned rocky and the air thinned. My lungs burned, but Ethan was relentless, pointing out every view like a kid showing off a new toy. "Look at that, Caleb," he'd say, gesturing at a valley carved by time, or a hawk circling above. His enthusiasm was infectious, and for a while, I forgot the ache in my heart. We stopped at a clearing to eat, sitting on a flat boulder. He handed me half his granola bar, our fingers brushing. The touch lingered in my mind. Electric, though he seemed oblivious, chewing thoughtfully as he stared at the horizon. As we climbed higher, the trail grew treacherous, loose gravel, sharp drops. Ethan stayed close, his hand grazing my arm when I stumbled. "Careful, man," he said, his voice low, almost protective. I wanted to laugh it off, but the way he looked at me steady, searching, made my pulse race. Was I imagining it? The air between us felt charged, like the moment before a storm. I told myself it was the altitude, the exhaustion, but deep down, I knew better. Something was shifting, and it terrified me. We reached a narrow ridge by late afternoon, the sun dipping low, painting the peaks in hues of gold and crimson. Ethan stopped abruptly, his breath visible in the chilly air. "Caleb," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I turned, and there he was, closer than he needed to be, his eyes locked on mine. The world fell away, the wind, the rocks, the ache in my legs. It was just him, his face flushed from the climb, his lips parted like he was about to say something that could ruin us both. "What?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. My heart was a drumbeat. loud and unsteady. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out, hovering near my cheek, but not touching. I don't know how to say this. He started, then stopped, his jaw tightening. I wanted to scream, to beg him to spit it out. But I was frozen, caught in the gravity of his gaze. And then, without warning, he leaned in, his lips brushing Minea fleeting. Impossible moment that set my world on fire. The kiss lasted a heartbeat, maybe two, but it was enough to unravel me. Ethan pulled back, his eyes wide, as if he'd shocked himself as much as he'd shocked me. I'm sorry, he stammered, stepping away, his boots crunching on the gravel. The world snapped back into focus, the wind howling, the cold biting my skin. The sheer drop to our left. My lips burned where his had been, but my chest ached with something heavier: hope, fear, confusion, all colliding like a rock slide. Ethan, what was that? My voice cracked, betraying every emotion I'd spent years hiding. He ran a hand through his hair, his face a storm of conflict. I don't know, Caleb. I felt something. He looked at me, raw and unguarded, and for the first time, I saw it. He was as lost as I was. The Ethan I knew confident, untouchable, was gone, replaced by someone searching for answers in the same abyss I'd been drowning in. We stood there, the sunset bleeding across the sky, neither of us moving. I wanted to grab him, demand he explain, but the fragility of the moment held me back. Let's keep going, he said finally, his voice rough, like he was shoving the words out. I nodded, though every step felt like betrayal to myself, to the truth we'd just stumbled into. The trail wound higher, and we climbed in silence, the weight of that kiss hanging between us like a fog. By the time we reached the summit, the sky was a tapestry of stars, the air so thin it sharpened every breath. Ethan dropped his pack and sat on a rocky outcrop, staring out at the endless peaks. I joined him, keeping a careful distance, though my body screamed to close it. You ever feel like you're running from something? He asked, his voice barely audible. I swallowed hard, knowing exactly what he meant, but too afraid to say it. All the time, I admitted, my eyes on the stars. Not him. He turned to me then, his face half lit by moonlight. I've been running my whole life, Caleb. From this. From you. My breath caught, and I felt the ground tilt beneath me. What are you saying? I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer right away, just looked at me, his eyes tracing my face like he was seeing me for the first time. I'm saying I'm scared, he whispered, but I'm tired of pretending I don't feel it. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But years of loving someone who could never love me back had built walls I didn't know how to tear down. Ethan, you're straight, I said, the words cutting me as they left my mouth. You've always been straight. He flinched, like I'd slapped him. Maybe I'm not as straight as I thought, he said, his voice breaking. Maybe I've been lying to myself because it was easier than facing this. The confession hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. I wanted to reach for him, to pull him into my arms and erase the distance between us. But doubt held me back. What if this was a mistake? What if he woke up tomorrow and regretted it? I'd lose him not just as a lover, but as a friend. The thought was unbearable. We should head back, I said, standing abruptly, my heart pounding. He nodded, but the look in his eyes hurt. Longing, fear stayed with me as we started the descent. The trail down was darker, the path less certain. Ethan walked behind me now, his silence louder than any words. I replayed the kiss, his confession, over and over, each memory a spark that threatened to ignite me. Halfway down, he grabbed my arm, stopping me. Caleb, wait. His voice was urgent, his grip firm. I need you to know I meant it. I don't know what this means, but I meant it. His eyes searched mine, pleading for something I wasn't sure I could give. I pulled away, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Ethan, this isn't simple. You can't just change everything and expect me to be okay. My voice was sharper than I intended, and he looked like I'd punched him. I'm not trying to hurt you, he said softly. I'm trying to be honest. But honesty was a blade, and it was cutting us both. We continued down, the silence heavier than ever, each step pulling us further from the summit and closer to a truth neither of us was ready to face. The descent was a blur of shadows and stumbles, the trail lit only by our headlamps and the faint glow of the moon. Every crunch of gravel felt like a countdown to the end of whatever this was: friendship, longing, or something neither of us could name. Ethan's confession echoed in my mind, each word a stone in my chest. Maybe I'm not as straight as I thought. I wanted to believe it, to let myself fall into the possibility. But fear was a relentless shadow, whispering that this would end in heartbreak. Back at the trailhead, we reached the car in silence. The night was cold, the stars indifferent above us. Ethan tossed his pack in the trunk, his movements tense, like he was holding himself together by sheer will. You want to talk about it? He asked, leaning against the car, his breath visible in the chilly air. I wanted to scream, to cry, to kiss him again and damn the consequences. But all I managed was, not now. He nodded, but the hurt in his eyes was a wound I'd inflicted. The drive back to Denver was quiet, the hum of the engine filling the space where words should have been. I stared out the window, watching the dark shapes of trees blur by, trying to make sense of the day. Ethan had kissed me. Ethan, my straight best friend, had crossed a line I'd never dared to approach. And now, everything was different, fragile, like a glass balanced on the edge of a table. When we reached my apartment, he turned off the engine but didn't move. Caleb, he said, his voice low, I don't want to lose you. You won't, I said, but the words felt hollow. I climbed out of the car, my legs heavy, and he followed me to the door. Can I come in? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. I hesitated, knowing that letting him in would mean confronting everything we'd left on that trail. But I nodded, because despite everything, I couldn't say no to him. Inside, we sat on my couch, the space between us a chasm. I'm not good at this, he said, staring at his hands. I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I feel something for you. I always have. His words were a lifeline and a noose. Ethan, you can't just say that, I said, my voice shaking. You've got a life, a history of dating women. I've spent years convincing myself you'd never feel this way. And now you're telling me you might. He looked up, his eyes raw with emotion. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's real. I kissed you because I wanted to, because I've been thinking about it for longer than I can admit. I stood, pacing the small living room, my heart a war zone. Do you know what this does to me? I asked, my voice rising. I've loved you for years, Ethan. Years. And I've watched you with other people, knowing I'd never be enough. Now you're saying you might feel something. But what happens when you change your mind? When you realize this isn't what you want? He stood too, closing the distance between us. I'm not changing my mind, he said, his voice fierce. I'm scared. Yeah, but I'm here. I'm trying. His hand found mine, and the warmth of his touch was almost too much. I wanted to pull away, to protect myself, but I couldn't. What do we do now? I asked, my voice barely audible. He didn't answer, just pulled me into a hug, his arms strong and steady. For a moment, I let myself believe it could be real, that he could love me back, that we could navigate this impossible terrain together. But doubt lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. The next few days were a blur of texts and avoidance. Ethan wanted to talk, to see me, but I needed space to think. I threw myself into work, sketching designs until my hands cramped, trying to drown out the memory of his lips, his words. But every quiet moment brought it back: the kiss, the confession, the way his eyes had held mine. I was terrified of losing him, but even more terrified of what it would mean to let him in. By the end of the week, I couldn't avoid him anymore. He showed up at my apartment, his face tired but determined. "We need to figure this out," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I'm not letting this ruin us." I wanted to believe him, but the stakes felt too high. "What if it does?" I asked, my voice raw. "What if we try and it breaks everything?" He looked at me, his eyes steady. "Then we break." But I'd rather break trying than spend the rest of my life wondering. Ethan's words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. I wanted to believe we could try, that we could bridge the gap between friendship and something more. But the fear of losing him was a weight I couldn't shake. We stood in my living room, the silence stretching, each second a test of courage. "Okay," I said finally, my voice barely steady. "Let's try. But we go slow. Ethan, I can't lose you." His face softened, and he nodded, his hand brushing mine in a quiet vow. The next few weeks were a dance of tentative steps and unspoken questions. We met for coffee, for beers, for walks in the park, each moment layered with new meaning. Ethan was different now, more careful, more aware of the space between us. He'd touch my arm, linger a little longer when we hugged, his eyes searching mine for permission, for reassurance. I felt like a teenager again, my heart racing at every glance, every smile. But doubt was a constant companion, whispering that this was too good to be true. One night, we went to a dive bar downtown, the kind of place where the jukebox played old rock songs and the air smelled of whiskey and nostalgia. Ethan was relaxed, his laugh easy, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking. "You ever think about the future?" he asked, swirling his beer. I shrugged, trying to keep it light. "Sure. A house, a dog, maybe a better coffee maker." He smiled, but his eyes were serious. "I mean us, Caleb. What this could be." My heart stopped. I wanted to say yes, to paint a picture of a life together, but the words caught in my throat. "I don't know," I admitted. "I want to believe in it, but it's hard. You're still figuring yourself out, and I've been here for years." He leaned closer, his voice low. "I'm not figuring myself out. I know I want you. I just need you to trust me." Trust. The word was a tightrope, and I wasn't sure I could walk it. We left the bar and walked through the city, the streets quiet under the glow of streetlights. Ethan took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine, and for a moment, the world felt right. But the moment was fleeting. A group of guys passed us, their laughter turning sharp when they saw our hands. "Faggots," one muttered, loud enough to cut. Ethan's grip tightened, but I pulled away, my face burning. "Ignore them," he said, his voice steady. But I couldn't. The word was a reminder of the world we lived in, the risks of being seen. Back at my apartment, I paced, the encounter replaying in my mind. Ethan sat on the couch, watching me. "Caleb, talk to me," he said. I stopped, my hands shaking. "This is what it's like, Ethan. Every day, people staring, judging, hating. Are you ready for that? Because I don't know if I can ask you to be." He stood, closing the distance between us. "I'm ready," he said, his voice fierce. "I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm not walking away. I want this. I want you." He kissed me then, not like on the trail, soft and hesitant, but with a hunger that matched my own. I kissed him back, my hands tangling in his hair, the world fading until it was just us. But even as I lost myself in him, a part of me held back, afraid of how much this could hurt. We pulled apart, breathless, and he rested his forehead against mine. "We'll figure it out," he whispered. "Together." I nodded, but the doubt lingered, a shadow I couldn't outrun. The weeks that followed were a mix of joy and tension. We were falling into something real, something beautiful, but the world kept pushing back. Friends raised eyebrows. Family asked questions. And every public touch felt like a rebellion. Ethan was steadfast, his hand in mine a quiet defiance. But I could see the toll it took on him, the whispers, the stares, the weight of a life he hadn't planned for. I loved him more for it, but I hated myself for dragging him into it. One evening, we hiked a shorter trail near Boulder, the sunset painting the sky in shades of fire. We sat on a rock, sharing a thermos of coffee, the air cool and quiet. "I love this," Ethan said, his voice soft. "Being with you. Out here. Away from everything." I smiled, but my heart ached. "What happens when we go back?" I asked. He looked at me, his eyes steady. "We keep going. We build something real." I wanted to believe him, but the trail ahead felt as uncertain as the one we'd climbed. The months that followed were a tightrope walk between love and fear. Ethan and I were building something fragile, beautiful, real, but every step felt like a risk. We spent weekends together, cooking dinners, watching old movies, stealing kisses in the quiet moments. But the world outside my apartment was less forgiving. Denver was progressive, but not immune to judgment. And every time we held hands in public, I braced for the stares, the slurs, the silent disapproval. Ethan faced it with a courage that humbled me, but I could see the cracks forming moments when his smile faltered, when his eyes grew distant. One night, we went to a friend's party, a crowded loft filled with familiar faces. Ethan was at ease, laughing with old college buddies, but I felt the weight of eyes on us. A guy I barely knew cornered me in the kitchen, his voice low. "So, you and Ethan didn't see that coming." His tone wasn't cruel, but it carried an edge, a reminder that we were something to be noticed, dissected. I shrugged it off, but when I found Ethan later, he was quieter, his hand slipping from mine. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, but the lie was in his eyes. The breaking point came in autumn, on a crisp October evening. We'd planned another hike, a shorter one, just to clear our heads. The trail was familiar, a loop through Golden Gate Canyon, but the air between us was heavy. We walked in silence, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound. At a lookout point, Ethan stopped, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Caleb, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice tight. My heart sank, knowing what was coming but praying I was wrong. "I love you," he said, and the word should have been a gift, but his tone was a warning. "But it's harder than I thought. The way people look at us, the things they say, it's wearing me down. I don't know if I'm strong enough for it." His words were a knife, clean and sharp, cutting through the hope I'd clung to. "Are you saying you want out?" I asked, my voice barely steady. He shook his head, his eyes wet. "No, I'm saying I need time to figure out who I am in this." I wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, but I saw the pain in his face, the weight he carried. "Take the time," I said, though it felt like tearing out my own heart. "But don't expect me to wait forever." He nodded, and we stood there, the distance between us growing even as we stood side by side. The hike back was silent, each step a goodbye I wasn't ready for. When we reached the car, he hugged me, his arms tight, like he was afraid to let go. But he did. Ethan left for a carpentry job in Wyoming a week later, a month-long project he'd taken to clear his head. We texted, called, but the distance was more than miles. I threw myself into work, into routine, trying to fill the void he'd left. But every quiet moment brought him back the kiss on the trail, the way he'd held my hand, the promise of a future we hadn't reached. I wondered if I'd pushed him too hard, or not enough, if I'd been too afraid to love him fully. When he returned, he came to my apartment, his face tired but softer, like he'd found some kind of peace. "I'm sorry," he said, standing in my doorway. "I needed to know if this was real, if I could handle it. And I can. I want to." My heart leapt, but I held back, needing more than words. What changed? I asked. He stepped closer, his eyes steady. I realized I'd rather fight for this for us than live without you. The world's not easy, but you're worth it. We rebuilt slowly, brick by brick. We faced the stairs together, held hands in defiance, built a life that was ours. It wasn't perfect. There were fights, doubts, moments when the world felt too heavy, but we carried it together. A year later, we hiked Mount Bierstadt again, standing on that same ridge where he'd kissed me. This time, he took my hand, his grip sure, and said, "I'm not running anymore." I smiled, my heart full, knowing that whatever haunted me from that first hike wasn't pine, it was the beginning of us. The trail had changed us, stripped us bare, and shown us what mattered. Love wasn't the kiss, or the confession, or even the happy ending. It was the courage to keep going, to choose each other, no matter the cost. And as we stood there, the mountains stretching before us, I knew we'd found our path.